The galaxy oh my god. I'm gonna try it again. The universe is expanding, so your galaxies, listen. Welcome to another day in the life at Oakleaf Cakes. Today I'm going to show you how to do a galaxy airbrushed cake design. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a plain white cake. We're going to use airbrush colors and our airbrush booth, which is critical, and we're going to put together a layered airbrushing galaxy design. So for our galaxy airbrush design, these are the tools we need. You need an airbrush. We have the compressor down here and its hose. This is the airbrush gun. With the loader on the top. These are our airbrush colors. You might think that space is just black. It is not. Black empty void, but it also has exciting things like nebulas and forming galaxies. So we have pink and several shades of blue, black, and silver. And that's going to give us more depth to our space effect. And then we have some opaque white gel color, and that's going to help us make some stars and galaxies. We also have royal icing, and I'll show you what that's for in a minute, and a brush and a palette. And then you also need a turntable, because this is going to be a design that wraps around the whole cake. My turntable is wrapped in plastic so that I don't get a ton of airbrush color on it, and that'll save me some cleanup later on. Okay, so cake on the turntable, make sure it's nice and centered. And we're going to start with a white cake, that way our colors are most vibrant on a white background. And the most important thing you need is besides your airbrush for this, is an airbrush spray booth. It's a series of filters, like air filters stacked inside the box with a fan, and then there's a removable cloth filter on the front of it to catch even more airbrush. If you don't have this, then figure out your own system. But this is super handy. That's made by Cakesafe. It comes everything in the box ready to go, and we use it for a lot of our cakes. We do a lot of airbrushing. We do winter designs, some of our sculpted cakes, and including galaxy. So you want this because if you don't have a fanned filter system, you're gonna get whatever color you're airbrushing is gonna be. It'll change your boogers blue, or you'll get red dust over the whole bakery. So whatever you're spraying, it's gonna cover your tables, your tools. It'll be subtle, and you won't probably even really notice it until you go to wipe things clean. That'll have that color on it. So a filtration system, spray booth, you need it. So for vertical cakes, for tiered cakes, we stack these one on top of the other. If you were doing a sculpted cake or something flattered to the table, you can orient these this direction. But for a tiered cake, we're gonna have the vertical position, and then they have these wings, which helps direct the air and the airbrush right to the filters. So we'll hook those up. These are clear, that way you're not blocking any light, and you can see what you're doing. Don't forget the top piece. All right, so on this design, I don't want to have any trim or beaded trim in between the two tiers. So what I'm going to do is just smooth that in with royal icing, and that'll create one continuous design without having a divider down the middle. So now that our seam is smoothed out, you also want a few extra scrap pieces of paper. That'll be your test sheets for testing your color or kind of spraying out what's already in the airbrush gun. And we're going to build up the airbrush color from lightest to darkest. So we're going to do, we're going to start with the pink, and that'll add the most brightest, highlightest is a word, depth. And then we're going to just kind of go in succession after that to the darkest colors, and then we'll do light blue, and then we'll do this royal blue, and then we'll do purple, and then we'll do black. And then at the very end, we'll rinse out the airbrush, and then we will spray it with some silver to give it some swirls and extra galaxy effect. So an airbrush gun compressor is down here. I usually wear gloves when I'm airbrushing so that I don't get my hands all dirty. So we'll start with the pink. And you load the color in the top. This one's really bright, so I don't need a lot of this color. And I'm gonna test on my paper, just make sure it's coming out, make sure the airbrush is functioning, make sure it's the color that I want, and it looks good to me. Now, with an airbrush gun, they have different types and different kinds. Ours is a Badger airbrush gun, but basically the trigger is at the top, and the trigger has two functions. If you push down on the trigger, that lets out the air, and if you pull back on the trigger at the same time, that will release more air, I guess. So you'll get more color and more spray coming out the more that you pull back on the trigger. So you'll get a bigger spot. And then the third trick with the airbrush is to keep moving while you're spraying. As I didn't move with this spot, so you'll just get like a real thick concentration of color, which is not usually what you want, because it'll end up running. Give a test spray on the paper, and you can move up to the cake. And for the pink and all the other colors, we're just kind of gonna try and imagine faraway galaxy spots and make it look like a psychedelic cow print, basically. And you want areas of really bright color, because when you spray around it later, then we can have this bright spot remaining, because the light colors are just going to get covered up by our dark. And you can have some spotted areas of color and some streaks. This design is a good design for beginners because you don't have to have the steady hand and the consistent motion. It's a little bit it's more forgiving than like a solid color airbrushed cake. So if you were rinsing, if you were going from a darker color to a lighter color, you'd want to take this to the sink and rinse out the chamber. But I'm just going in order of lightest to darkest, so we're good to just keep adding color. And we're just going to continue with our colors, leaving some white space until we get to the purple. And you can have blobs and swirls and spots. And even if you overlap these colors, then you get a third color. Just make sure you don't totally cover up the first color. We want to be able to see these bright colors even behind the black. Don't be afraid if it looks a little crazy and ugly at this point. We're only halfway there. Now we're on to the royal blue. And again, you don't want to cover up your pink and you don't want to cover up that light blue. And now we have the royal purple, or a violet is the last color. And we really don't have to add a lot of black once we get to the end, because the layering up of the purple gets pretty dark. All right, and the last one will be black. And then we'll have to rinse it out before we do the silver. The black, you have to be careful that you don't cover up a lot of the color that you've already added. It's just to add extra depth kind of in between the colors. So trigger-wise, I'm just going to barely pull back on it so I don't get too much black spraying everywhere. I'm being extra careful not to overspray because you can't unspray the airbrush. All right, so in my chamber I have black airbrush. We're just gonna rinse this out in the sink and then we'll do the silver. Also, when using airbrush colors, if you give them a shake at least before you start, as well as kind of throughout your airbrushing process, a lot of them, the richer colors, and especially the ones that have like the pearlized sheen in them, will tend to settle towards the bottom. So shaking them before you start will give you a more consistent coverage and make sure you get all the sparkles all mixed up. So now we're gonna do the silver. And the silver is not really gonna, it's not gonna have the spotty coverage like we did before. It's gonna be more of a line drawing. So the fourth thing about airbrushing is there's the two aspects of the trigger and then the constant motion of the turntable so that you get consistent coverage rather than just spots. But the final thing is proximity. So if you're closer, you get more of a line. And if you're further away, of course, you get mist. So rather than just misting this with silver, we're gonna get closer and we're gonna spray a little less on the trigger, and we can get these like curly cues and spiral galaxies and stuff like that. It's easy to get carried away with that part. All right, so that's the silver. And that's basically it for the airbrushing. The final detail will be to just add the stars. So we're gonna rinse this out. Definitely make sure you always rinse your airbrush out. You don't wanna have any dried airbrush color in the bottom or any standing water in it. That'll cause it to get rusty. So just make sure you take good care of your airbrush gun. That way it works clean and smoothly every time. So now we have our airbrushed cake. The next thing to do is add the stars. You can't have a galaxy without stars. That doesn't make any sense. So we're gonna use the gel. It's more of an opaque food color, and it's just white. If your paint is still sort of wet from being airbrushed, it's still fresh. The white might pick up some of the color underneath it while it's still wet. So we might get some different shades of blue once the white dries, which will be fine, and then we can let that all dry and then come back later on and do some more white splatters, and that should stay put. So I have a bucket here as my tester because I don't want to go crazy splattering things until I know I have the right consistency. So the paint right out of the bottle, or the gel color, and probably should also wear eye protection or a mask or something, or just stay back, because when you hit it with your hand, you get paint all over your face. So if you get enough paint on the end of your brush, you don't want to load it because you want like all the bristles with little paint on the end of them. I'll give you more stars. So the paint right out of the bottle is, the food color right out of the bottle is the right consistency, so I'm just going to stick with that. If you feel like it was too thick, then you can just add some water, but for me, this is good. Definitely got some on my nose. And you can play around with getting closer to the cake. You get more splatters, and further away they get more spread out. The more paint you have on the brush, the bigger dots you get. This also galaxies your whole table. There we go. I can also use the turntable itself. Improvise. It's definitely a galaxy right here. So now we have our cake is airbrushed and it has the paint splatters for our space dots. Next we're going to add more space dots, also known as stars, with royal icing. So I have a small number 2 tip on my piping bag. You can have different size tips. This one I feel like is the easiest. And this will just add white stars of varying sizes, and you can do constellations hidden secret messages and constellations, whatever you want. So this is my finished galaxy airbrushing design with all my space dots. It's now ready to add spaceships or aliens or planets or whatever you want to add. Or it can just be a standalone design. It's pretty cool by itself. If you like our videos, feel free to like and subscribe and share, and we'll see you on the next video. How to galaxy your face. Definitely got some on my nose.